of Iran, state-run and state-controlled. The entire trade was. And so he moved into also production, textiles, sugar, etc., and the construction of railroads. So this is the time of Reza Shah. When you come to the time of Mohammad Reza Shah, initially, as Walton also suggests, that planning was not really a serious exercise. Firstly, there was no money. And after the Second World War, for many years, Iran oil income was hardly anything. And the planning was much more of an indicative plan, just a combination of some wishful thinking, by the government. Until Ebtihaj came, and became the head of the plan organization, and loans from the World Bank started coming in after the 1953 fall of Mossadegh and the new government coming in. You remember, I avoided the word coup d'etat. Right. And then you got into serious state building, but with a major component of the private sector. That was the whole import substitution industry approach of the 1960s, that with the assistance of the state, but not directly, which was the policy under Reza Shah. This was now indirectly, through the state banks and through the private sector and promotion of the private sector, in order to add what I call the production cycle to our economic development through the private sector. Did I answer you? I don't.
Any clarification on you?
Okay.
Very good.
In political theory and somewhat economic theory, we basically follow the way modalities and arts of government change from one form to another. You've got the pastoral modality of power, which assumes the role of a despot, or not a dictator, but somebody in charge of the affairs, who cares about the well-being of the population, and so on and so forth. And you have the police state that is on the top, and then you've got the liberal art of government, at least in the European experience. And with the liberal art of government that there are certain modalities that can be extracted from the liberal art of government that on its own can produce certain logics of how to govern, basically. Mm-hmm. And that, in a sense, is contradictory to the role of the pastoral power, to the despot. So the minute you've got that aggressive economic liberalism, in a way, you're accepting the fact that soon I'm going to be gone. Soon there's going to be this autonomy asked by the market of different forces and so on and so forth, and they're going to be like, you know what, screw you. Was this sort of understanding prevalent in the Iranian intelligence at the time?
Very good question. Let me give you one example that has always been if you like, a kind of a model, and it fits in very well, and I'm sure you can elaborate on that much better than I, is Korea. Mm-hmm. Korea, in its economic development process, started with state-run private sector, and now is a private sector running state. So the transformation had long enough time to move from one end of the spectrum, as you very nicely defined it, to the other. And they managed the process. How they managed it, I don't know, but it's very clear now it is the state which depends on the major corporate institutions. And here, again, if I may emphasize, and I don't think we spend enough time to do so, the importance of corporations and institutions. One of the signs of underdevelopment is lack of them. One of the signs of development is how powerful they are. One reason we talked about the relative government or smaller government, because we have such giants in Canada, United States, and other countries who are really major players and cannot be ignored. And I can go through the 500 Fortune list, but they're all there. And by the same token, there are also other state-owned, state-run institutions. In our part of the world, we had to start somewhere. Obviously, we started with the state. And then we moved on. The whole idea was that that transformation will take place. By the same token, and I don't want to open a parenthesis here to suggest that therefore some of the technocrats took comfort in the fact that the march of history is on their side. Let's put up with the extra bit of dictatorship now because the history is on our side, and that transformation will happen. But the dependency of the private sector, in my view, to the time that I was there, still was there. Whether it would have taken another generation or two, that's a matter of pure speculation ex post. But it seems to me that there was nothing for us not to have followed the Korean model over time. And therefore, the political transformation would have been an extension of that once the private sector becomes independent of the state.
But here, the missing element in comparing Iran and Korea, at the same time that Iranian Revolution was happening, Korea was having also this mass uprising, the students pouring into the street, but the military would go and knock them dead. Whereas in Iran, this kind of things didn't happen. So in a sense, you had a much more repressive state in Korea. And Iranian military, while it had the machinery and equipment, it didn't do what the Korean state or the Korean military did. Does that make sense?
I follow.
So in a sense, that transition.
But the end result is where we are now.
So in a sense, the Iranian state had faced a crisis, serious crisis, but it could have transcended it without the revolution. And we have the example of Korea. That is, they probably had the same kind of crisis. They faced it without the revolution, and they have the kind of economy that they have today. Whereas Iran, the state was much more fragile, or it didn't have the will. Shah, we ascribe a lot of sort of will to him, but he
didn't use the apparatus of state. Well,
but this subscribes to this repressive state that revolutions happen because the states are not repressive enough, which I don't like at another level.
I understand.
Well, thank you.
Dina.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment. Also, when you mentioned Korea, I think it's interesting because there is a North Korea and a South Korea, and they're sort of diametrically opposed to each other. So I think if we look at South Korea, we have to think about its development in terms of who its neighbor is, and of course Iran has not had this situation. So.
Dina.
Yeah, I just want to bring to the picture also Egypt, and Nancy talked about this a little bit, because in 1977 there was a mass movement that was as big as January 25th of students and people going to the streets and workers striking in factories, and it was gonna turn into a revolution. But you talked about the importance of sequences, how the sequence of events. And it took only one decision from President Sadat to stop a revolution from happening, but it was at the verge of happening. It was to stop the austerity measure that was gonna be by the IMF. You mentioned it in your comment today. So I think that many states were at the verge of revolutions, and the reaction of the Shah or the state, like you said, has a strong say in it, and it's not only about oppression. It might be just a smart political act.
But see, I think there is another element, and that is Iran had a large number of students abroad. And actually, they thought, we are now looking at Iran, we think that it was too rapid of an economic development. All the Iranians who were abroad, they were critical that Shah is not changing fast enough. So, and they had all the college campuses, they had a lot of the Western press at their command, and that was another element. So in Saudi Arabia, they didn't have to deal with that. Libya, there were a few pockets of Libyan students here and there, but Egypt didn't have this sort of very powerful student. And many of the Iranian students actually had learned from the anti-war Vietnam protests, and they had become all revolutionary. They wanted revolution.
So like it's a revolutionary moment that was there in Iran but wasn't there elsewhere because of the ideas that they brought.
Ideas, and then this, I think the global moment, that is, if it was only local, it could have been contained. But it wasn't just a local moment. It had much larger global spillover that could not be controlled by one person or one decision making in Iran. For example, when Khomeini came to Paris, you couldn't control the exoticism that he attracted, and he got so much press, and thus whatever he had to say, it would have been broadcasted widely. Whereas when he was in Iran's best friend, the next door neighbor, Iraq, the Iranian government didn't have to worry about him.
So maybe also I was reading Perry Anderson talk about revolutions, and he said one of the reasons for a revolution to succeed is to create him like of a counter sovereignty. So maybe the presence of Khomeini actually did make a huge difference. There was no Khomeini in Egypt or in Saudi or in any other way, but Khomeini was able like to create a counter sovereignty that a revolution could capitalize on.
But adding to the student movement outside of Iran.
Yeah, they created a revolutionary situation, I guess, and he just like capitalized on it.
Yeah, yeah. One of the issues that we have been dealing, we started the class by reading Lenin on revolutionary situation, that you can have a revolutionary situation, but you may not have a revolution, and it depends on a whole lot of things. And it depends on how the ruling state can no longer rule the way they used to, and then the rule won't accept to be ruled the way they did. And in situations where you have the revolution, is that the ruling class cannot rule, and the rule does not accept the existing order of things anymore. And then you have the organizing, a party, a person, a group that really consciously makes the revolution. And in Iran, you have these elements sort of falling together, whereas in other places, you didn't have that sequencing and combination that was necessary to push through.
Sort of to backtrack just a little bit on the example of Korea, how it had state-led development, where the state controlled the market, and then it switched where the market basically controlled the state. What is it in Iran that sort of that makes it different? That it didn't have this transition? Like Korea didn't have like a revolution the way that Iran did, but like what rupture was there in the Iranian Revolution that made it different from Korea?
They didn't have oil.
Does it just come down to oil?
They didn't, yeah.
I think also the work ethics of Koreans is something to consider, and how the level of productivity. And I really don't know the society that well. What I can tell you is that something would have happened in Iran the same way if we had more time. I think that's easier said than done. But given the transformation, given what happened later, I could see that certainly the private sector in Iran was not in the stage of being able to operate as the, say, Toyotas do. It was too early yet. But the potential was there, and good policies were there. If there were mistakes, could have been corrected. But meanwhile, it's like exam times. You're short of time. If only I had an extra half an hour. If only I had. And this is also in case of Iran. On the contrary, we pushed it too fast. Therefore, we never had the chance of developing it. Once you're pushing it too fast, then the time frame becomes something that if you cannot cope with it, you collapse. The system. There is no time for transformation. You have to have a manner in which we had effectively, if I'm not mistaken, about in the car industry something close to 400% protection. I mean, Koreans started with that, or the Japanese started with that, but they soon came down to much, much less, and they became an investor in other countries in the same field. For all these things to happen, we needed a good couple of more decades minimum.